Welcome to Conversations with Healers, a podcast and video interview series that features intimate, soulful, and cozy conversations with self-healers and healers. Healer to healer, we dive into all aspects of self-healing and healing and being and becoming a healer. I am Damla Aktekin. I am a healer and the host of this podcast, and I can't wait for you to listen to this conversation. Hello everyone, this is Damla Aktekin with a drop of Om, and I'm so excited to have Veda Austin here with me. Veda is a water researcher, author, artist, mother of three, and I would say, Veda, that you're also a water communicator, and you have a book called The Secret Intelligence of Water. So before we dive into all of that, I have so much questions to ask you and so much to talk about. But I want to ask you sort of how this all started. How did you end up being a water communicator, water enthusiast even, and a researcher about this subject?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. My first real connection with water started in a very unusual way. I was in a very serious car accident about 25 years ago. We went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice, and the driver was decapitated. It was considered one of the worst accidents in New Zealand where someone survived. And over the course of 20 years, I had 8 operations for mostly bowel surgery because the seatbelt had kind of crushed all my internal organs and my collarbone and had left scar tissue on my small bowel that grew. And every time I would try to eat, it was like being in labor. So it became absolutely critical that I have all these different surgeries. So on my last one, they found that I had blood clots in my lungs. And I was very surprised because I live a very holistic life. And I've never smoked a cigarette, I've never done drugs, I haven't eaten meat since I was 8, I've never smoked a cigarette, all these different kinds of things. And for me, the idea that having blood clots in my lungs just seemed so crazy. And I wanted to do everything naturally I could to heal my body. And the doctors wanted me to be on warfarin, which is a blood thinner, which doubles as a rat poison. And I was in a lot of resistance to that, but I was fed the fear for a few months, and I took warfarin for several months. And then they scanned me. They said, no, it's all gone, but we'd like you to continue on. But I didn't want to continue on with that. I really believe that your body can heal itself. This is purely my belief. I mean, of course, we're all entitled to make our own decisions. And I wanted to investigate really what was going on with my body and if there was something natural I could do. And I have a doctor friend of mine. He's a medical doctor, but practices Ayurvedic medicine. And he said, look, totally off the record, have you thought about trying an all-natural, high pH water? He said it might be able to help stabilize the pH of my blood. pH stands for the power or potential of hydrogen. And it goes from a 0 to a 12 on a scale, and 7 is neutral and 7 is distilled water. So I was wanting to try water which was a 7.1 upward. So I started being a kind of guinea pig of my own health, and I started trialing different waters with a higher alkalinity. So I was trying water from around about a 7.6 to an 8.2. In New Zealand, the water is generally, our rainwater is about a 7.4. So it's not hard to find a slightly alkaline water, but nothing much happened. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. When you're just drinking water, it goes in you. So other than what comes out, you don't really know what's going on. And so I kept doing that. And then this person, this friend of mine, said, you know, there's this man, he has his own private water source. The pH out of the ground naturally is 9.9, which was the highest I'd ever heard of a natural water coming up from a spring. And he said he's only giving, she said he's only giving it to cancer patients, so you might want to try it. And so I was super excited, and I went to go and speak to this man, and he gave me a month's worth of water to try. And I was really excited because firstly it tasted slightly different. It had a different texture to it, and I knew that it had a higher pH, but it just felt different on a vibrational level. And so I started to drink it. And on day 3, I noticed something that a lot of people don't really like talking about, but it's really important, which is about bowel motions. And there are many, many people out there that are severely dehydrated, and they're sitting on the toilet trying for an hour to push a pebble out, and that's not normal. So a lot of those problems can be fixed by just drinking more water. And so I noticed this change. And after all that bowel surgery, that meant a lot to me. And then on day 10 and day 12, between 10 and 12, I had all these bumps coming up along on my arm and along my jaw that was super painful. And I was like, what is this? This was 20 years after my car accident. I ended up getting some tweezers and like poking into my arm, and the tweezers hit something hard, and I ended up pulling out a shard of green glass. And between day 10 and day 12, 27 pieces of glass were purged out of my body that had been in there for over 20 years from the car accident. And I know they were from the car accident because the man who was driving the car, he owned a nightclub. In the back of his car were lots of crates of Steinlager beer, which is a lager which is in a green glass bottle. So when the car rolled, I went like this, and a lot of the green glass went through my arm and in my jaw. But it didn't just start purging glass out of me. When I was a teenager, I had a big thorn go between my knuckles, and we thought we'd got most of it out. But this petrified piece of wood started to make its way out through my knuckles. I'm like, what's going on? Lucky there's nothing else in there. And that's where I started to realize that this particular water had something extremely special about it. I owned a wellness center at the time because I have some gifts of healing. And I have a slightly higher electrical charge than many people do. So I'm one of those kinds of people that accidentally gives people electric shocks a lot. And I was able to start to learn how to use that. So when I was a little girl, I had a lot of issues around being immersed in seawater. So the first time I ever got bowled over by a wave, I came screaming out and said, "Mommy, Mommy, I've been stung by jellyfish," because it felt like my body was like being actually electrocuted. It wasn't like the stingy feeling of salt. It was like pain. And then that kept happening, and my mum took me to the doctor, and he said, well, you can't be allergic because you can paddle in water and you can do all of these different things. But his only real suggestion is that perhaps the electrical charge in me is reacting with the salt in the seawater and is creating some kind of electrical field, which is making me feel really hurt. It's like being electrocuted. And so I sort of started to avoid the sea because it was painful, even though I wanted to go in there so much. So after some time, I began to be able to recognize that I was able to use this electrical charge that I can now kind of use, that can come out of my hands. And I started doing something I called electrical acupuncture, which sounds awful, but actually most people would fall asleep. And I was able to touch people in certain places and they'd feel a little electric shock, but it was able to move energy through them. And so as I started to become more aware of how water moves and how water flows and the importance of flow, it's so important within the body and so important for the health of water, that I was able to start almost seeing the body of my client as a water system. and starting to see where needed to be the blocks were able to be kind of moved away. And I stopped doing that because the gift that I have is a little bit untamed. So I started to build what I was doing. And this one lady came to me and she lay down on a table, and you know the sound you hear when you have an electric fence, it makes a sound. Both of us heard this kind of electrical sound happening, and I could feel it coming up through my body, and under my hands were under her neck, and she just got this big shock, and her hair all stood on end. And I think probably mine did. And she just got off the table and looked at me like I was the devil and ran away. And I'm like, oh, I think it's time to not do this now. And so I kind of just stopped and I went really sciencey. But I had been working with sacred geometries. So when I would do these sessions with people, I would do them in an open four-sided pyramid, large, so that like 8 people could be inside of them. And I started using the water that had helped heal me, and I was able to observe some really interesting things that happened within these pyramid structures. So I would say to people, it's not like you're going to fly off into the 5th dimension. This is actually a tool. These different pyramids were used for different things. And I have found that the effects that pyramids actually have on water and on people for healing is through oxygenation. So I did a dissolved oxygen test on water. I got water that was from my tank where I lived back then in Matakana. And I got 2 glasses of water. One, they're both the same, from the same tap. I put one on the bench in the house and one in the pyramid, which was in a separate house in my little studio. And I observed that the regular water, its dissolved oxygen levels were 4 out of 12 parts per million. When you put that same water into a pyramid, what I noticed was that the dissolved oxygen levels within an hour went 11 out of 12 parts per million, and to such a degree that you could see all the bubbles starting to form on the water. Extreme. And so I started to notice some really interesting things happening with using these different techniques.
I love that. So I want to just ask you, before we move further, so your book, The Secret Intelligence of Water, to me, it features some of the pictures you have taken through your journey of beginning to explore water. And it seems to me like the book itself, rather than trying to explain something, it feels like an invitation to look at water differently and to like almost engage with water differently. Can you talk a little bit about that? And we have a few pictures to share with people too. Like, how did you begin to take those pictures and what were they about?
Well, I started to realize about that with water, you can't just understand water by looking at its analysis. That's telling you what's in water, what water holds. But then you look at water structurally and how water can actually hold and store information on many different levels. And so I started to become very interested in the stage between liquid and ice. So my very first ever kind of test, I don't like to say experiment because I'm a body of water and I don't like the idea of being experimented on. So I was interested in Masaru Emoto's work. Many people have heard of his work, where he showed positive and negative words and took microscopic photographs of flash frozen water crystals, and the beautiful crystals would show in a positive image, and kind of a mudslide would form in the word hate, for example. So his work was very much in contrast through geometries. And then there was a man I know called Laurent Costa who showed microscopic photographs, but he was capturing images. So images of like hearts and faces and fish and things like that. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. It's kind of geometries, then images, but all microscopic. And back then, 8 years ago, I didn't have a microscope, but I thought, well, I'm just going to see for myself if water can show me something. So I petri dish, and I had some amazing water that had water in. It was that I would simply say something, think something, and freeze it, and happen. I had no idea that anything would happen. So then I noticed some fluff in the water. It's like, oh God, so I put my hand in to take the fluff out, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's memory. And when I pulled it out,
Hello?
dish. And are you there?
So we lost you there for a moment, Veda.
Can you hear me?
So my understanding is that you began experimenting with taking a little bit of water in a dish, and you would either show it an image, an art, word, or even just a thought form. Or in some instances, I believe you work with sound directly, which is one of the things that I do. I do sound healing. And you also experimented with distance healing on the water. And then you took the photograph of the water as it was beginning to crystallize into ice. So it wasn't quite liquid, it wasn't quite ice, the in-between state. I believe you called it the fourth stage, or the fourth state of water, phase of water. Would it be okay if I show a few images to our
Show people.
listeners? Okay. So there we go. And these are all from your book. And this one, actually, I literally cried when I saw this. Do you want to tell us about this one?
Yeah. My mum was a walking angel, and she died in 1999. And I used to live in Japan, and we would write to each other back. That was well before emails. And at the end of every letter, my mother would write a circle, would draw a circle with a heart in the middle. And so I said to water out loud, I just said, can you connect to my mum? And this was the image that I got on the left. And then a year later, I asked the same question, and I got a very similar response. So it is as if water is the medium, in a way, the go-between, where it's able to reveal very special, very important messages from places that we can't see. And it shows that the connection of love, I think, is transported through water. And just because we can't see something doesn't mean it's there, not there. And water is also in the air, and water is in the in-between. Water is probably the veil just as much as it's before the veil and after the veil. Yeah. So for me, this was something very special and very personal that I showed. For this one, this is just really, really obvious. I used those 2 ginkgo leaves so I just placed the 2 ginkgo leaves under the petri dish. So I put the petri dish on top of them for 30 seconds, and then I used my technique, froze it, pulled it out, and this image on the left is the result, which is pretty amazing. Because
it's almost like you're having this conversation with water. It's almost like you're challenging her a little bit, like, what else is possible? And then water is like, here you go, here's this.
Well, I think that water now has kind of got to a point where it really wants to communicate. So I feel like I'm the medium and water is the artist. This was cool. This because it's so unique and so kind of obvious and different, and you can see how water has really put some effort into like the design of this ring. But I had a wedding invitation, and so I just put the petri dish of water on top of the wedding invitation for 30 seconds, and this was the result in the ice that I took. And you know, it's interesting because on the wedding invitation there wasn't actually a picture of a ring. It was just saying that you're invited to blah blah blah. But water had chosen the symbol to design to actually give us something really unique and specific that we associate with weddings. So it really is showing a sign of intelligence. And this really is showing a sign of intelligence and artistic expression.
I love this one. So it's responding to the Van Gogh's famous sunflower painting. And
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious what water is saying here, right?
It's no surprise. And also here with the manuka flower. So the flower there, it's just something that a little branch that I took from across the on my neighbor's tree. And so I mean, even that too is very special and very unique to the image, the flower
And
that it was shown.
I want to point out the six-pointed stars, like the starship that we're used to think about when we think of snowflakes, when we think about like water crystals. It's very beautiful, and it seems to be a constant theme in your pictures as well.
It is, but it's also water's state of health. So I always see hexagons with spring water and compared to water like from a tap, for example, which doesn't do that. This was music. So I've done a lot of different co-creations, I call them, because water responds with me. So, and this is from a song called Space that my eldest son really loves by a band in New Zealand called Homebrew. And I love how it has designed these kind of nebulas and different space-like pictures. And in the middle one, it's almost as if you can see like a little satellite up in the top. It's very cool, but they look very much like space.
And I love this one because that's my business name, A Drop of Om. And this was you used a tuning fork, I believe, with this one.
Yeah, I use tuning forks in the mid-tone of Om for these. And I've done a couple more since then too. And there we go. So there's some obvious similarities in these images, which is a big part of my more scientific aspect of the work, and that my mentor and very dear friend, his name is Dr. Gerald Pollack, and he is one of the leading water scientists in the world. And his suggestion to me was to really let people know too that with my repeat studies, I'm not taking hundreds of photos because the ice melts much too quick for that. I'm just taking 1, maybe 2 photos per petri dish when they come out. So these are exactly what you see as soon as they come out. These are not the best of the best. These are simply what you see. So that's actually a very special part of my work, is that water is actually almost like deciding how to show up, how to design something. So I'm collecting almost now something I call like hydroglyphs. It's where because I have all these repeated patterns, I'm able to now see what each pattern means for each word. So I have 25 words that I can now recognize through images like hieroglyphs. And I'm able to read water and see what it's saying through these words.
Sacred language, speaking through the symbols. Yeah.
But nature always hides her secrets well. So it's why it's hidden within this crystallographic medium. It's not something many people would sort of see or think to look in. This is also lovely. And I like what I've written about it, because to me anyway, the images kind of look like a vase or a bowl that came from the chant Padme Hum. And the begging bowl has a significance with the Buddha. And in one legend, the Buddha was meditating, and a woman offered him a golden bowl filled with rice, thinking he was the divinity of the tree. And he divided the rice into 49 portions, one for each day until he would be enlightened. And he threw the precious bowl into the river. And the images, it's like as if the water has remembered the bowl in each single picture. And so the significance of the chant and the Buddha and the story have kind of come together in these lovely images. And it's always sort of open for interpretation.
I was going to say, to me, it looks a lot like the heart, like the Om Mani Padme Om, the connection between the heart and the mind. The jewel in the lotus is that you place the wisdom of the heart in the wisdom of the mind, and it opens up. So, like, I'm seeing a beautiful, like a little pet heart in there. But I love your interpretation as well.
But see, that's the beautiful thing, because I like to weave. I call it weaving with water, weaving with science, weaving with art, weaving with consciousness, and weaving them together. So what we're seeing is repeated patterns. What the patterns mean to you is up to you, up to interpretation. And then the conscious part really is that water appears to not only be reflecting consciousness, but possibly, I mean, from what I'm seeing, I have over 10,000 of these photos, so then there's no coincidence anymore. To me, it's as if water really has a consciousness of its own. It's like that each image is slightly different. It's as if there are slightly different artists designing the same image, but that's part of the beauty. Yeah. So this is one of those things I was just talking about. It was one of the words. So one of the words I now have and know is that when I project the emotion of love, it always shows up in hearts. But what's interesting is when I project the emotion of stress, it always shows spikes. But when I wrote the word heartache, yeah, there you go. There's the spikes. That's what stress looks like. But actually, I wrote the word heartache, and water took the spikes, but it put a heart on the end of the spike, which was really interesting, quite a complex way of showing a complex feeling. So it was very interesting. And this is very consistent. I've done many more of these, and they've shown, I have at least 8 images that I've done like now repeatedly like, for stress.
Yeah. Stress picture looks to me like almost like knives or swords of some sort. Yeah. Very spiky.
Yeah. Very spiky. And that's kind of how it feels a little bit, I think, too. So yeah. Kindness and gratitude is the hexagon shape that I was saying. So water in its most pristine state. So professionally for a couple of years, my job as a water researcher was to basically show in a crystallographic medium the difference between water in its healthy state and water in its degraded state. Water in its healthiest state shows these beautiful tight hexagon shapes, and they're very consistent. So if I just go to a spring and immediately do my test to see what the patterns will be, you'll always see these gorgeous sort of feathery hexagon shapes. That's water in its pure state of health. So when you are projecting the feeling, the thought of kindness and gratitude, the water responds through almost like a self-healing. So I've done this also as a way to see if I can help water heal. So I've taken tap water, like you can see in the left-hand side there. It's just that some of the tap water never really shows complex imagery, whereas you can see after the prayer, that's starting to form more of a natural, healthy shape that's starting to go into that hexagon shape, but it looks a little more like a leaf. So water is self-healing through intention. And it's very important, this work, because it also is a reflection of us as water beings. and that we can self-heal through our own self-healing way of the self-love.
I love
And
I love that. And the specific mantra used here was the Ho'oponopono, right? I'm sorry, I love you. Please forgive me. Thank you, which is one of the ones that I love. I just have a few more pictures from your book, which along the same lines. So this was
yeah,
distance loving energy, which is basically, I feel like it's mainly what I do in my healing work. If, whether I'm working with a group or whether I'm working with an individual. So this is pretty significant to me, the change that you can see just by sending loving thoughts to someone.
yeah, it's hugely significant. And I mean, considering this was stagnant water on the left, so it actually re-enlivened it. It changed it completely, its structure. So my friend Alan, you know, he was all the way in California. I was in the test water was in New Zealand. He just sent his intention through, and he's a powerful healer, no doubt about that. And you can see that through the structural change. And this is cool because I like how the water is so degraded. This is particularly bad tap water on the left, but you can see on the right that the water has transformed almost into like what looks like a magic wand, but you still see that hexagon shape is formed. As long as you start seeing those hexagons, then, or the beginning of them, those stars, you're seeing water healing. And this is beautiful because I took the tap water on the left, and then I photographed so you could see what it looked like. And then I took that same tap water and I left it out, and I invited lots of people from around the world to send their love and thoughts and prayers to their sad tap water. And you can see the structural change is absolutely dramatic. So it proves, because I've done this so many times, they're not coincidental, they're not one-offs, it's not, it's just not random, that it is true that distance healing is very real. You can see it in these water images. You can really, I mean, when you start to understand how water forms and its specific patterns of health, you can really see a huge transformative difference when it comes to not only distance healing, but, healing hands-on. So I always say to people, if you've got your water bottle and, you hold it to your heart, the electrical charge coming from your heart and your intention is going to actually impact the water.
Yeah.
It's not going to take any nasties that might be in the water out, which is why I'm not just looking at an analysis. What I'm looking at is the energetic.
Yeah. So I'll wait for you to come back online. You're back. You're back. It's funny, before we started, I was actually requesting the internet gods and goddesses to help us with this recording. I think we're doing good so far. One thing I wanted to ask you, Veda, which you're so beautifully illustrated in your work, and you were talking about just even taking your glass of water. You can put your hand on it, you can put it close to your heart, or just sending your thoughts to it. And my question was, and the reason I ask about it is this. So because we are also made up of water, as well as what we drink. And one of the things I tell the people that I work with and that I know that's true in my life is daily practice. So the question, or the daily self-healing, as well as getting healing help when you feel that you need. My question is, when you send these loving thoughts, is there an expiration date? Is there is there an entropy that, that something from the environment comes and takes it away? Like, how often do you need to keep doing this? What's your take on the time element of sending loving thoughts and energy?
Well, I think of it as a mother because I'm a mom. So when I tell my child that I love them, I mean that always. It depends on your relationship with water. I think the most important place to start is to build a relationship with water. When I donate 1 day a month to teach in primary schools, and one of the questions I say to the children, I say, if your skin was invisible and your organs were see-through, what would you look like? And only in these moments do the children start to say things like, one very clever boy, he said, I think I would look like a brain-shaped cloud with water coming down in the shape of my body. I thought, wow. And then one child said, I'd look like rivers running all through me. Until you recognize that you are a water being, and by molecular count, you're 99% water, and that there are more water molecules in your body than there are stars in the Milky Way, and that water came from outer space, and it's one of the reasons we know virtually nothing about it. Until you recognize that there is a force beyond anyone's imagination living within you that is giving you life, that is very difficult to truly embrace what you are about to drink or what you really are. So the relationship with water must begin with love. And love doesn't have any kind of end, not if it's real. And that's showed in the picture of my mom. I say I love you to my mum. I know that she's hearing it now just as clearly as ever, and that never changes. So it all depends on your own relationship with water. And I think that's about developing that, about developing it. Because if you say, I love you, you should mean that. That's not going to stop. So it's important to have a daily practice, I think, of relationship, because I don't think of water as a resource. I think of it as a relative. Water is the life-giving bloodline. Without it, there is no life. Someone once said to me, what if water is expressing its consciousness through us? And it's a very interesting thing to ponder. But if we just start to form a relationship, that's where I think the most important place to start is take the water and remember that it's a body of water. Just like you're a body of water. Someone said to me, what's your favorite body of water? Thinking that I would say, someplace, and what's my best source, and blah, blah, blah. I said, my 3 children. My favorite bodies of water are my 3 children. And so if you think that the water that you're holding is going to become one of your children if they drink it, well, the water that you're holding is going to become you. What do you want to become? So how much do you love yourself? So that's the most important part, I think, is that words have meaning and they have power. But thoughts, our true inner thought that only we know, that's the relationship part, where if it's very true, then that should last a lifetime. And the water feels that. And we feel that. We know when somebody means it. So I think that's the very important part there.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I love that you're also, it's the common element, right, with it, us and all the living beings and all the things that give us life, including plants. We have that commonality. It's like the omness of the universe, that we all have this within us. How do you think water relates to the quantum field in your work, in the sense that when you're interacting with it, just the way you put it, lovingly, is there do you feel like the water is tapping into the past, present, and future, or the oneness of the time, or even the combined fields of our waterness? Like, what is water tapping into when you're talking to her?
Well, I think that water has a memory of everything, for both the past and the present and the future. And I can say that because I've seen images relative to 100-year-old uh, Maori. So there's an area in New Zealand that had a lot of Maori settlement that was around over 100 years ago. I took some water from the stream there, and it showed this incredible image of what's called a pātaka, which is a Maori food storage hut, which were up on stilts, and that the food and water was held within this little structure. And I went searching for some images of it to compare it to, and I found an image which was almost identical to the ice image that I had taken, which where actually the water had a memory of something, of a structure from over 100 years ago. And then in the future, now I stopped actually asking so many questions to water, and I let water reveal things to me, because we have a kind of communication that doesn't require me constantly asking questions. And so I allow water, I don't allow it, it does what it wants, but I really just let it do whatever, and show me whatever, because I feel like I'm a student in many ways. And so often it will show an image that I can clearly recognize, but I don't really know why I'm seeing it. For example, there was an obelisk shape, a very clear obelisk that showed up in water. And then about, I don't know, 5 hours later, a girlfriend of mine came over and she said, "Oh, you should see this obelisk crystal that I just got. It's so beautiful." I'm like, "Oh, that's so interesting. I just saw that." And that's happened multiple times. And once I said to water, "Show me something really important," and it showed me a very unusual shape, which I've never seen before. I still don't actually know. It hasn't appeared yet into my realm of understanding, but I know it will. But these have happened multiple times, in that it's able to show something from the future, and I see it manifest. But not only that, because if you consider there's all kinds of water still in space, and that if you know that water itself, at least 70% of it came from meteorites and asteroids. So we're talking about millions and millions and millions and millions of years old information from outer space. And so water is able to communicate so just like, I'm only seeing a fraction of what I think and truly believe that it understands and knows. But I talk about it as if it really is alive. And what I keep seeing, though, is that water, as soon as water enters something, then it becomes alive. And when something dies, the water itself leaves and the salts remain behind. When someone's cremated, their ashes are actually salts, and it's the water that is evaporated. So it's a very beautiful thing that I see, where life, water, actually doesn't die. It's always in one of its stages of reincarnation. And so the idea, the possibility that upon death, that water, that I think that there's different stages of water. There's a liquid, solid, gas, and a type of gel, which is the kind of water inside of our cells. But also, I think because we know so little about water, it may be possible that the liquid water, the informed conscious part of the water within us, might somehow change into a vibrational vapor, different than the regular vapor we see from when we boil water. But perhaps it can actually shift very quickly from a liquid into this vibrational vapor, which is a gas. And when a gas expands, it cools, which is why people feel spirit as cold. And with that comes still all of the information that we have, that we've collected over all this time, which is why I think that one of the greatest gifts we have as human beings is to leave beautiful memories in the water bodies of others, because that's how we are remembered. That's something beautiful that we can leave behind, is beautiful memories and other people. And when we leave, then we are also taking the memories that other people have given us. So memories are very beautiful. If you really think about it, we're a body of memories. Our whole life is a memory, and right now is what we have.
Yeah, and it seems to me from what you're describing, there's a whole lot more in there, and a lot of scientific, spiritual tradition, not scientific, tell us that the answers are within.
Yeah.
Within. I want to ask you, what does, in your experience, in your thought, heart, mind process, what does the water want us to know?
Well, I think that water in its most pure state is transparent. And ultimately, I think as human beings, it's one of the things we often are not. Often we are not transparent. We have masks, we have all these different things that we try to hide of ourselves. Water has this purity about it. It's not judging. It doesn't judge. It doesn't know color. It doesn't have religion. It doesn't have anything dividing. It enters the body of an ant as easily as it enters the body of us. And it is life. So I think one of the most beautiful things that water would want us to know is the reflection. So water is reflective. And when we look at ourselves with our fourth phase, 99% water eyes, to remember that water really is the source. It's the source not just of our hydration, not just of our essence for being alive, but it is a source of information. It's a source of love. It's a source of non-judgment. And I think that that's a wonderful way that we could reflect water if we truly understood water in the way in which it's showing through these images. It's showing us we are what we think. It's showing us that it can transform and change from good to bad, and that it's not judging that. It transforms, it takes on these patterns. So when we start to understand ourselves as water beings, I actually think that we're the true power. When I think of power, I don't think of power over people, I think of light. It's like turning on the light. So it's like expanding the light within us. And the healthier the water is, the more light it can absorb. So my feeling is that water itself is showing us a beautiful example of divine sacred love. Not in the way that we tend to think of love, which can be romantic love and these different types of love. I'm talking about a love which is transparent, which has no agenda, which is simply is, and that absolutely is an all-inclusive for all life, not just human beings, but every being, everything, all the trees and the plants. And that every time it rains on you, you know, it's raining down liquid life. And that I think when we start to appreciate the water in everyone and everything, then there's an inclusiveness that starts to happen. And the water in us starts to communicate with the water in the creatures, in the trees and the leaves and each other. And it is the way in which it's the fastest way to create unified love and a unified field through the water within us. And because it expands out, because I think that the liquid part of us is like a spider. The energetic part of us is like the web that the water has created. So we can feel like measure electrical charge coming from the heart, like through heart math and things like that, which explains certain energy fields. But I think through the water is actually much more of the subtle levels of energy work. So it's as if the liquid water in us is built like this extended web, like lots of dewdrops drops upon it that can actually feel and pick up energy. It's just that we can't see it. Again, just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And that is a way in which we feel energy and also give energy. And these different ways, I think water is ultimately teaching us how to, not only how to understand ourselves better, but understand ourselves as the most sophisticated water system on the planet. Honestly, I think that when we start recognizing that we really, this skin that we have, which is also so much water, is really preventing us. It's like Bruce Lee said. He said, "Be like water. Water becomes the cup. It becomes the vase." Well, the human body is like the cup. It's like the vase, but the water has become part of that shape. But just because we see the shape, we think that's what we are. But in fact, everything, we're only a cut away from liquid, an emotion away from liquid, an exercise away from liquid, a toilet break away from liquid. But we think we're so solid. I think that the water is the ultimate guide and teacher to teach us that we're not what we think we are. And that when we start looking deeper, we find that the real true source of light and life is within us.
I love that. I love all of that. So I feel like we've been talking about, we talked about the effect of our thoughts on the water. We talked about beginning to establish a relationship or cultivate a respecting relationship with water in general and the water that we are, which is one and the same, and expanding that over to other animals and beings all around us. I want to ask you on a physical level, what are some of the ways that we can ensure that the water that we're intaking, other than, definitely putting the positive thoughts and the love and the healing in it, how do we need to purify our water? What are some of the things we can do to make sure we're getting a little bit more structured water in a physical way?
There's lots of cute, really nice modalities that don't have to be expensive. Even just stirring your water, creating a vortex. Water loves to go in a vortex shape. I mean, there's just so much talk about how water loves to move in certain ways. Victor Schauberger talked about flow forms, and even if you do it in the shape of an 8, it creates these beautiful kind of re-enlivening shapes and forms for the water to spiral. It loves to spiral. And another thing you can do is to also put your water in a blender, because that also creates that vortex shape. But I personally love to filter my water with silk, because when you filter, you just get a little bit of silk, and you just you put it over your cup with a rubber band, and you just pour your water through it. That actually gives water a whole new structural element. I've done quite a lot of studies, and Rudolf Steiner actually recommended that, and I started doing it, and it structurally changes water dramatically, and I think it's incredible. And the other thing is, okay, there's so many different things. You can get all different kind of water structuring systems, but I try to give people things they usually will have at home, things that they can do.
I love like lemon juice or cucumbers, that sort of
Adding lemon cucumber and lemon, both of them are all 4th phase water. So anyone that wants to know more about that, I would say go and watch one of Gerald Pollack's talks, on his TED talk about 4th phase water. It's a type of gel. So things like cucumber and watermelon and aloe, things like that, they kind of have a stretchy, viscous type of texture to them. And that is one of the ways you can see it's 4th phase water. It's not a liquid, it's not a solid, it's something in between. It has a different viscosity, a little bit like egg white is another example. So when you add those to water, you're adding another type of life to water. And it does make a difference. I've done crystallographic changes and seen them from your regular tap water, and then when you add lemon juice to it, it does structurally change it. It starts to help it heal because the information exchange is there. I do also think it comes down to your intention as well. So to be mindful that your intention is not just affecting only water, but it affects the water inside of the lemon and inside of the whatever you're adding. So I think that's why prayer has been so important in many, just not just religions, but philosophies and ancient wisdoms and indigenous beliefs, because prayer is not just praying over the water, but praying over the food, and there's also water in your food. So it makes a huge difference. I think that is really where the transformation happens, within the water, inside any of the life systems that you're using to eat. Because no matter what, if the water is still in it, there's some life force still there. One of my inspirations, his name was Dr. Thomas Hieronymus. He was a radionic engineer, and back in the earlier 19th century, he went to a French meat market, and he discovered, not that I would go there because I'm vegetarian, but anyway, I'm not Thomas Hieronymus, and I'm grateful for his work. And he observed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind them. For example, the heart organ appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze in the shape of a heart organ. And then the same with the liver. The frost looked like a liver, and then so on and so on and so on. And his idea was that these organs still had some life force energy emanating from them to impact the way the frost froze. And his idea was that it still had life because it still had water. It still had the water within the blood of the organ, and it still had the ability to impact the way in which the frost froze, which suggests to me that, you know, the what we put in our body, as long as it has water still in it, it has the ability to impact us. So for many ways in which animals are killed now for consumption, I would really highly recommend praying and being grateful for what you're eating and saying a prayer for that animal that gave its life for you. And I'm sure it didn't want to. So there was resistance in that. So to be able to actually release and go, I'm so grateful, I'm so sorry. Say the Hawaiian prayer to this food you're having, because it will change what's left in the water and that memory to some level. At least the gratitude will make a difference to the way in which it behaves in your body.
And it doesn't have to be out loud. It could just be it could just be a moment in your mind, and it can change everything. You talked a little bit about the seawater. One of the things I recommend often is right after a healing session to take a bath, an Epsom salt bath, or either take a bath or soak feet in the water. What do you think is happening when we add salt to the water? How is it changing it or affecting it?
It's a great question. Nobody's asked me that, because one of my other passions is salt. One of the big studies I've done is on salt, because we're not freshwater beings, we're saltwater beings. And I think it's the salt in our body that actually stores a lot of the memory, the cellular memory, because salt is a crystal. Crystals store information. They're in all our technology. And so that's, I think, a very important thing. But a while ago, I used to write a lot of information would just come through me. And one of the things I wrote was about a scientist called Efiti, many thousands of years ago. And he observed that when people would go into the ocean, he was able to somehow, using a very ancient technology, measure their kind of auric field, I suppose. And he observed that when they would come out of the ocean, their auric field would be clear. and they'd go in with an unclear field and come out completely clear, and it would last about 15 minutes. And so he started making these salt rubs for people and started to measure their auric field after they had had the salt rub, and observed that their field stayed clear for like nearly an hour. And so there is something extremely magical and powerful about the power of salt, because salt is always been used as a preservative, but it's very, very cleansing. And that if you put the energy, mindfulness, thoughtfulness, intention into the actual salt that's going into the water, it's important, because salt literally is a crystal, and it can and will store vast amounts of information, and it will transfer that information into the water. And it's very, very cleansing. It's a very powerful thing, salt. It's one of the reasons people, that the term worth your weight in salt, not just gold. Back in Roman times, salt was so powerful, but obviously not the poisonous salt that table salt is, but mineral salts. But it also holds minerals. And salt is absorbs so much light. And so the marriage of salt and water is in fact incredibly important, because salt is a shapeshifter like water. It can dissolve and you can't see it, but all of a sudden, oh, there it is when the water's gone. And water can disappear, and then suddenly it's there as well. So when you bathe in water and that has salt in it, it is very clearing, it is very energizing, and it's very powerful. Much, I think, more than we've actually recognized. I think that the power of salt is completely and utterly been overlooked.
I love that. So it's what I'm hearing you say is that, because what I tell people is, it does have like almost an electrical cleansing effect, because that's the way it feels for me. But I love how you mentioned the marriage of the salt and the water, and putting the intention to have that beautiful conversation with them.
Yeah.
Not just to clear, but also to nourish yourself energetically. I absolutely love that. Okay, I could talk with you for hours, Veda, but I just want to ask, I guess one last question I want to ask is, so where's water taking you? What's next for you?
Well, like you mentioned, I've finished my book, The Secret Intelligence of Water, which shows it's about 90% images. So it's super easy for people to look through, and it is really just displaying what water has shown me so far. But there is some pretty big things on the horizon. I've got my own show coming up, which I'm going to start very soon on Awake TV. They've given me my own show, which will run for 3 months. So once a week, I'll be doing a talk, and I'll be probably interviewing a few inspiring water type people, and also sharing some more practical things, to help people see what they can do, how they can do some of the work that I'm doing. I feel like there's a lot more coming. Water has a lot in mind, I think, for this, because I don't think water's doing this work with me for no reason. When you consider that water is life, then water has something in mind. I think that there's some pretty big stuff coming up, and that none of this is a coincidence. There was a period of time for me for the last couple of years where I was just a complete nerd, just doing all this stuff. No one had no idea what I was doing. I was just going away. I've only just opened an Instagram account. I haven't even posted anything yet. I've only in the last maybe 9 weeks has anyone in the world even known what I do. But so quickly, I've been doing a podcast nearly every day. I've just been given the opportunity to do this show. I'm doing a big event coming up in September, which I'm not allowed to talk about yet, but it's coming, and as soon as I can, I'll share it. And it's like the world is ready to have some new truths, to see the world in a new way, because we're coming into a new world. And I just keep saying yes. because when you're doing something that's greater than you for a bigger purpose, you have to show up. And so I keep doing that. I just keep saying yes, and I keep staying humble, and I keep taking any ego out of this from my part, because I see that really water is doing all of this. And I'm just grateful that I get to be part of it, and that I get to be, just able to share like I am, because that's how it feels. I'm very humbled in many ways that water is doing this with me. It feels like a great honor when you really know or you really feel what you're working with. It's extremely humbling, honestly.
Well, thank you for doing all that you do. This has been like discovering your work has been not just a confirmation, but also a mind opener for me to think about the relationship with not just my skin, but with everything in a new and exciting way. So thank you so much. And if anyone's interested, I'm going to include your website and your social media, Facebook, Instagram, as well as your book, The Secret Intelligence of Water. I've actually shared it. I sat down my husband and my daughter. I went through the whole book with them. I sort of forcefully read the book to them. And I just want to share one more little thing before I finish up. You and I were sort of exchanging emails to do this. And then you said yes, which was, I was like, yay, I'm so excited. And then that night I sat down to watch a movie with my husband, which was The Justice League, which is a superhero movie that features DC Comics characters. There's Wonder Woman, there's Batman. And in one of the scenes, Batman is actually asking Aquaman, and he asks, so how do you talk to the fish? And then Aquaman says, the water does the talking. And I was like, yes, this is a good sign. Thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. And I feel like with what you do and the way you look at it, it's almost like the water crystals, the hexagons. I know we touched upon the main branches, but there's so many little branches that go off. And I have so many more questions, but we have so much time. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you do. And I'm sure our listeners are going to love this as well. Thank you, Veda.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.